Hello, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the U-FERN webinar series. We are pleased to have Dr. Dave Mogk with us presenting today. First, I wanted to introduce you a little bit to the Undergraduate Field Experiences Research Network, or U-FERN. U-FERN is a project that's funded through the Research Coordination Network program, which is by NSF. And it's in order to advance the field of undergraduate field research by supporting the growth and collaboration of a network of undergraduate field experience researchers. We aim to build a network that is open, inclusive, and finding ways for all people to have a voice. I'm going to share my screen. I just have a couple slides that I would like to share. All right, hopefully everyone is seeing that. So again, we have Dr. Dave Mogk with us today, and he's going to be presenting on entering the community of practice, learning acceptable behaviors in the field. And here's a few objectives about the U-FERN network that I mentioned. If you have any questions or want to get in contact, you can either reach out to myself, the project coordinator, my name is Kelly Hope, or to Carrie O'Connell, who is the PI on the project. We've already announced the webinar for February, and the registration for that should be up in the next couple of days. And just a few logistics before we get started. All of the participants are muted. We do encourage that you use the chat function on this side to share resources with each other. And any URL links that you share, we'll save those and post those online with the webinar. If there's any questions that you have, if you'll put those into the Q&A box at any time, and we'll address those either at a transition if it's appropriate or at the end of the session. And then just one quick poll before we get started. And if you'll just take a second to answer that, we'd appreciate it. And just another note that we will be recording and we'll post the webinar at the end, and that will be found on our website. And here are some ways that you can get involved with U-FERN. So we do have a listserv if you're interested in finding out more information about either these webinars or other announcements that we have. You can do that. And again, you can reach out to either Carrie or myself, and the U-FERN Gmail address is at the bottom there. And you can also find information on how to reach out to us on our website. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dave.
Okay, thanks, Kelly, and thanks to U-FERN for inviting me to make this presentation, and thanks to all the participants for joining us this morning. Kelly, I just want to make sure, is the screen shared appropriately?
It looks great, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, just to start, my background is I am a geologist, and my examples today will be from the earth sciences, but I hope that you'll be able to see how this can extend across any of the natural or field sciences. And these thoughts also derive from two big projects that I've worked on over the last number of years. The first is called the Synthesis of Teaching and Learning in the Earth Sciences project that was run by Kathy Manduka and Kim Castens. And so the first half of this talk will reflect on some of the things that we report on about learning in the field. And the second half will focus on work I've done recently on geoethics and professionalism. And that also is a NSF-sponsored project. So thanks to NSF for their support, and we hope them a speedy return to our community. So let me just start. I have to move a little text box here. Now I can see my slides. By affirming that field work is good. And I think that if you're on this webinar, you are already a devotee. But I'd like to reflect a little bit about what is special or unique about learning in the field. And then how can we best help our students enter our community of practice in doing field work, because there are some opportunities and challenges that are unique to this environment. Okay, I'm not advancing. Why am I not advancing? There we go. So this talk is going to be in two parts. The first part is learning from or about nature and thinking about our work in the physical environment of being out in the field. Through immersion in the raw nature of science, considering questions of scale and complexity, and really asking the question how we can best help students navigate in the field setting and to gain the cognitive and technical skills required of the profession. But the second half is going to be is going to be oriented towards science as a social enterprise. And this really has to do with the interactions between scientists, between mentors and students, and really asking the question, how do we best transfer information from our expertise as masters to students as novices? And what other social implications, social structures and dynamics are at play? And how do we impart the norms and standards and practices of our profession to students? And I keep having a text box come up in front of my slides, so I'll try to move that. Anyway, so a few things about the field learning environment that I think is important for us to remember as faculty and mentors and advisors. And this definitely impacts the way that we interact with students in the field. So one thing is the scale in the field is large relative to the student. And what this means is that the students are small in the landscape that we're studying. On the other hand, if you consider lab sciences, usually the scale of observation is small, looking into a beaker or down a microscope or something like that. It's really important to think in the natural setting about scale of observation. Here we're looking at a full landscape in Yellowstone, but in other situations, we might be looking at a single outcrop or at material through a hand lens. And so it's really important to be thinking about the scale of observation and also about both temporal and spatial reasoning, both of which present major barriers for learning for students. We have to know how to physically move in the environment. Knowledge of spatial relations are stored in memory and are available for retrieval for later use. So the ability to correlate and compare, for example, one field setting to another. And these are experiences that really are acquired through physically moving in the space of nature and really can't completely or adequately be replaced by artificial or virtual field trips. The other thing, we'll talk more about the affective domain coming up, but there are strong sensory inputs. And these sensory inputs are directly related to memory and cognition. You will remember the day the lightning bolt hit the ridge behind you and all the things that encompassed in that day. So sensory inputs are very important. And the other thing is that landscapes are big and complex. And by working in the landscape, it's important to know what to focus on for the task at hand and what to exclude. And this is a cognitive skill referred to as disembedding. Learning in the field has a large cognitive load. We have to process on so many levels. We have to take information in from many sources and integrate that. And so as field leaders, we have to keep this in mind and design our field learning activities accordingly. I've written a bit about something called novelty space, and the concept here, and Orion from Israel has also written about this, but the concept here is that students really cannot learn if they are uncertain about where they are geographically, what's expected of them scientifically, what tasks they should do and what the product should look like, and if there's any concern at all about personal comfort or safety or logistics or anything like this. And again, these are images from our REU project in Yellowstone, just showing the very real day-to-day eventualities. We absolutely got blasted by a thunderstorm on the right. The student in the middle is working on a field-based computer system, and he needed the proper training on how to use that before getting out into the field. And in one summer, we had 14 grizzly bear encounters. And I will tell you that gives you pause when you're out in the field with a dozen or so undergrads. So planning and preparation is absolutely essential to help reduce that cognitive load. The full context of the work must be articulated and understood. Being able to see the big picture, to know something about the earlier work that's been done in the area. These are just a couple of, a general index map on the bottom and the earlier geologic map where we were working. Students have to know how to read the story of the earth or the landscape. And in geology, this would be looking at questions of process and questions of history. In ecology, that might be looking at populations, population dynamics, and certainly complex relations in an ecosystem. We have to make, as I said earlier, we have to be able to make observations on multiple scales of observation and be able to integrate from landscape or regional scales on the left to a single outcrop. The close-up picture is a picture of a garnet bearing rock that we might look at through a hand lens. We have to be able to integrate information across these numerous scales. The other thing is, out in the field, we always have to be making logistical decisions. What's the best traverse? How do we get to those critical places to collect our data? What equipment do I need for the day? And again, concerns about comfort and safety. You know, I'm always, in the high country here in Montana, I'm always looking over the ridge to look for those first puffy clouds that blow up in the afternoon, because I know I'm going to get hit by a big thunderstorm by about 2 o'clock or 3 in the afternoon. And so all of these things add up to a huge cognitive load that the students have to be able to work for. And then knowing the specific tasks, in my case as a geologist, sample selection, making measurements, and really having this internal dialogue as you're doing the field work about what samples do I need to collect? Is this sample representative? Will the sample answer the questions that I'm interested in terms of process and history? What's the appropriate sample distribution grid? And is this sample appropriate for future analysis? We'll come back to Angela collecting this sample a few slides later. And I purposely picked this complex diagram on the left. This is a phase diagram that shows pressure and temperature. And all the lines indicate the stability fields of minerals. And the point here is that students have to be able to recall from memory knowledge that was hopefully learned in the classroom and to be able to apply it to a distant field setting. So again, here we are back looking at my garnet schist, and those garnets tell me something about the stability in the formation of this rock in terms of pressure and temperature. And so by looking at the rock on the left, I can infer pressure and temperature conditions on the right. And this is a huge cognitive leap for students trying to integrate complex field relations with theory and concepts that they may have learned in the classroom. The field, though, does afford certain gains in terms of cognition, and there's a number of these that have been articulated by many people. Certainly, cognitive gains include the ability to develop higher order thinking skills. And on Bloom's taxonomy, this would be things like comprehension, application of concepts, analytic thinking, and synthetic thinking. Kolb has written extensively about experiential learning and the importance of experiential learning to lead to deep understanding of concepts and content. In the natural phenomena, we see the full environment, and this is where students can be encouraged to see connections among different parts of the system and to see relations among the components. In many cases, this provides great interdisciplinary opportunities to integrate across disciplines. And again, NSF and many others have really placed an emphasis on inquiry and discovery in STEM education. There are also metacognitive gains from learning in the field. And metacognition is really learning about learning. And in this context, students really have to be self-aware of what they know and what they are able to do. And this leads to, first of all, self-monitoring processes where students moving through the field are forced into a position where they have to make decisions. And those decisions are based on what they know or what they have yet to find out. And there are also self-regulating actions as well. And self-regulating, you're walking down a ridge and you see some relations and maybe you say, oh, this isn't consistent with what I saw before. Maybe I should go back and take a look. So self-monitoring and self-regulating activities are absolutely essential in the field. And this also leads to planning the day's activities and goal setting, certainly to critical thinking, and then to conation, which is the ability to make future plans and to take goal-oriented actions. In terms of the affective domain, the affective domain are those things that affect a student's ability to learn. And affect includes things like motivation, curiosity, sometimes fear. There are many, many barriers to learning. But in the field, again, some of the affective gains are just a sense of awe and wonder, maybe an aesthetic sense about the beauty of the place where we are, and curiosity about what's over the next ridge. It develops intra and interpersonal relations in the field as we work collaboratively and cooperatively. Working in the field may change attitudes, values, and beliefs about science. It may be a motivator to learn more science. On the other hand, if a field exercise is not designed properly and puts students in danger or in some other compromising position, it may actually have a negative impact. But we do overall see an increased level of self-confidence and self-reliance among students that work in the field. They certainly develop lifelong memories, poignant experiences. We know this in the geosciences. Field camp is reported as the peak experience for most students going through our geology degrees. And when you talk to alumni, it's the one thing that they want to contribute to is sustaining field camps and field experiences. And it also results in networking relations. And that could be mentor to peer, peer to peer. Sometimes guest scientists come in to field settings, and that can also help establish lifelong relations. So a few thoughts about engaging the community of practice. And the first thing that I would just point out is in any field science, there is really a long apprenticeship that is required. And this opens the door for novice-master relations. And the challenge for us is how to impart the mastery that we have earned over many years of experience in the field and bridge the gap to the students who are just starting on their professional career development. We tend to use language and sometimes shorthand in ways that can be opaque to a newcomer. We have to be very careful about the language we use and explanations that we provide. Many of the practices may be obscure as well. Why are you doing it that way? And a lot of what we portray to students is actually represented through not only our speech, but also through gesture. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. Another challenge is the selection and appropriate use of tools. In the upper right, there's a picture of a Broughton compass. That's how we measure the attitude of rock planes in space. And that tends to be a big challenge, helping students understand spatial relations as measured with the appropriate use of the tool. And then there's also community practices that deal with ethics, values, and expectations. Things like work habits, the ability to work independently, but at the same time, the ability to work collaboratively in groups. How do we make decisions in the field? There are always questions of personal work ethics, and then, again, the collaboration and communication skills. So in the geosciences, we have a maxim from H.H. Reed that says the best geologist is the one who has seen the most rocks. And I think the message here is to get out in the field early and often and interact with your students and share your best experience. Now, I'm going to change focus just a little bit to some of the social attributes of working in the field. And this work is based on Chuck Goodwin's work, who is my co-author on our 2012 paper on synthesis of research and learning in the field. And one of his major points is the importance of embodiment in terms of learning in the physical space where we are working. And the key here is that brain and body are connected. And what our body is doing in the physical space where we're working has a direct connection to cognition and memory. So really, this is being aware of how we act in the world, how we interact with the objects that we are studying, how we position our body with respect to the object of interest. Chuck says it's knowing your way around and being oriented in the conceptual and physical space where we're working. It's an immersion in the natural environment. And again, this leads to sensory input in the affective domain, and the affective domain is directly related, again, to memory and cognition. It fires all the senses, and again, it really requires not a single exposure to nature as we study it, but to sustain exposure to the natural variations of the landscapes where we work. The other thing is that when we do science, embodiment isn't just how we orient ourselves in the physical space where we're working. It's also being aware of the social space where we're working. And again, Chuck Goodwin writes beautifully about the importance of gaze, being able to share with a group in the middle picture the object that we're looking at and drawing attention and focus to a particular element in the environment that is of importance to our task, and gesture. And in the lower left, I'm showing a couple of students some relationships on the map. And in the lower right, geologists can't go to an outcrop without waving their arms, literally, to show, in this case, the sense of deformation at that outcrop. So it really is important, I think, for us as educators to be aware of how we are orienting ourselves in space with respect to the objects that we are seeing, and to impart that to our students as well about how to appropriately approach and study and collect and sample and measure the object of study, and also to be aware of how we position ourselves with the people around us to best impart information to them. And this is just a cartoon that Chuck drew. And let me just say that the important part of this is in our field instruction, we are not only monitoring the landscape that is around us, we're also monitoring the activities and behaviors of the students that we are supervising. And as we go back and forth from the landscape to the tasks that the students are doing, we can help direct the fine points. Maybe the sketch has to be changed in such a way, maybe they need an orientation, maybe they need a scale. But the point is, embodiment includes both the physical landscape and the personal space. Another important thing that we have learned is the importance of inscriptions. Inscriptions are representations of the natural world, and as it is translated into notebooks or recorders or photographs or other representations, we say this is translating nature into culture, and it is often the first inscription that is the most important, because this is where we're making decisions about what is important in nature and what we're going to record in our notebooks or graphs or maps or other images. As we move through the process, Latour writes about a chain of inscriptions, and the chain of inscriptions are increasingly refined representations. But the real point I want to make here is the reason that inscriptions are important are the 3 P's at the bottom. They are public. What this means is that we're taking our thoughts about what we see in the environment and making them available to people around us as a public demonstration of what we value or where we find meaning. They're portable because our field notes and our maps and our images will go back to the lab with us. They will show up in publications, and they're also permanent records. And that's important because we may never get back to this field site again. So anyway, being aware of the importance of inscriptions and the tasks that we ask students to do are incredibly important. And this is just an example of some inscriptions we did in our field site in Yellowstone, where we asked the students to slow down and sketch in detail a variety of outcrops where we're trying to figure out the relationship of the different rocks, the light gray to the dark gray, and the relative timing and the processes that are involved. So just a few words of advice for faculty trying to facilitate learning in the environment. As always, I would hope that field instruction should be student-centered with a real eye towards what the students really need to know and the type of experiences that will help them in their professional development. The learning goals must be clearly articulated and the assessments aligned with those goals. Planning is always essential, but let me just encourage you to be aware of how you're how you are interacting with nature and with the students around you. So thinking about embodiment. I would also encourage you to be both explicit and to externalize your thoughts. Reveal your inner mastery. Let the students know, what are you thinking? Why is this significant? How does this connect with stuff that we did yesterday or to things that we learned in class? And I think that you'll be well served as you work with students in the field. Kelly, I'm just going to keep going. We'll do questions at the end. But I'm going to change gears here a little bit and talk about some of my experiences recently in working with ethics and professionalism. And the point here is that there are many considerations of social constructs and dynamics that can impact learning in the field. And I would just encourage you to be aware of these social dynamics, because it definitely is going to impact not only the quality of your field experience, but also the student's ability to learn. Okay, there we go. So one thing I would put out there to start with is we're all members of professional societies, and where in the curriculum or where in your experience do you formally present the code of conduct or code of ethics from the professional societies that you work with or members of? We have a listing of these codes on our Teaching Geoethics website, which the link is at the back of the slideshow. But these are just a couple of things from the American Geophysical Union, from their policy for integrity. And notice that almost all of these have a social aspect to them. Integrity and honesty, accountability, courtesy and fairness in working with others, cooperation in research, stewardship of research on behalf of others, legal compliance, and a humane approach in if people are dealing with animals or human subjects. So there's a huge social aspect of the work we do as scientists. And I'd like to just review a couple of principles that I think are the foundations of what we do and how we interact as scientists. And the first thing is power. In all of our teaching, in our workplace, in field environments, there is always a hierarchy of power in social structures. And this power sometimes is earned, sometimes it's bestowed, sometimes it reflects maturity of experience. But in any case, we have to be very careful and very aware that in some cases, this power can be used to empower and enable and enhance, and that's a good thing. In other cases, this power can be used to subjugate and denigrate people. And I think that we have to be very, very careful about our use of power. And we'll come back to this as well. The second principle is trust. This is from the National Academy of Sciences, and they say that the scientific enterprise is built on a foundation of trust. Society trusts that scientific research results are an honest and accurate reflection of researchers' work, and researchers equally trust that their colleagues have gathered data carefully, have used appropriate analytical and statistical techniques, have reported the results accurately, and have treated the work of other researchers with respect. So trust is incredibly important as we work in the field setting. We have to trust that the leaders are going to take us to appropriate places. Safety is going to be a major concern, that we trust that people are going to pull their weight in the field setting, whether it's camp chores or scientific. And so trust is with us all the time. And trust is simply the relationship between or among people and facilitates cooperative social interactions. In everything that we do, there's a certain amount of risk-taking. We have expectations that all participants will use their skills appropriately and with sound judgment. And it suggests that we're trustworthy, competent, that we work with goodwill, and so on, and that we certainly follow all ethical and legal duties. I want to say just a word about some special relationships that are built on trust, and one is mentoring. And there's a large and growing literature on the difference between being an advisor and a mentor. And an advisor, provides the basic facts and some guidance about how students can move through their academic career and what the requirements are and when they take their exams and so on. But a mentor is really an advocate, and a mentor plays a direct role in nurturing and caring for the student, is there to provide wisdom and empathy, respect again, knowledge and support, creates opportunities, make sure that students get to the right meetings or that they have developed the right skills. And it takes an active interest in the development of the student. This is from the Kerr Quarterly, the Council for Undergrad Research, some strategies for effective mentoring, just making yourself available, both for professional and personal counseling. Fostering a community, this idea of community of scholars, really does lead to improved success rate, and particularly for students from underrepresented groups. Be attentive, be encouraging, and be understanding. So it really is a special role that we play as mentors. Another pillar, so we've got power and trust. Another pillar is respect. And I won't belabor this, but really a successful field campaign really needs all participants to have respect for people, for each other, for the profession that we love, and ultimately for the conduct of science. And I'll just say that these are all lessons we should have learned in Sandbox 101. And finally, the fourth pillar that I see is responsibility. And this is from the Geological Society of America Code of Conduct. This is responsibility to the profession. But again, here are the human dimensions. We've got responsibilities to students and colleagues, to employers and employees. If you're consulting, to clients. We have responsibilities to the public, and then ultimately to the environment. We do, in our field studies, we do have our responsibility to ask students to engage responsible conduct of research. I won't belabor this, but just everything from data management, data collection, data management, mistakes and negligence, research misconduct, laboratory safety, should you come to authorship and peer review, there are certainly responsibilities in all those domains. As field leaders, we also have a responsibility for safety for everyone, everywhere, all the time. That is just something that we have to take care of. And the field setting, I have to say, is an area where alcohol and drug abuse, sexual harassment can be a problem. And I can just say that through our work in the geosciences, we have just adopted a position of really zero tolerance for these things. The exposure and the liability is just too great for you to allow a bad situation to arise. There really have to be consequences. I encourage you to have policies in place. And a good place to start is the Keck Geology Consortium that has these types of policies laid out in their student participant handbook and a parallel handbook for project leaders. And the last thing I want to talk about is somewhat disturbing, but I'll just open by saying everyone has a right to a safe, inclusive, welcoming, and productive work environment. And the field setting is special because it is an environment that really can lead to some bad behaviors. We're in a close living situation. We work long hours under duress, difficult conditions. The social structures may be in place regarding power, We have to be careful about exclusion of people. There are privacy issues. And all I can say is that bad behaviors are a cancer that can really ruin a field campaign. So you need to be aware, be proactive, and be preventive. So here's a couple of things. Be aware of microaggressions. Again, there's a big literature on this, but microaggressions are any casual degradation of any marginalized group. And these are day-to-day small indignities, but they are cumulative. They send a message of exclusion, and they hurt. Everybody really does need to be part and contributors to a field campaign. Be aware of implicit bias. Implicit bias refers to attitudes and stereotypes that affect perception and judgment without our being aware of it. You know, it could be something as simple as carrying equipment in the field. You may assign that to guys, or note-taking assign to women. Just be aware of built-in implicit bias that can really poison the situation. And here's the ugly part. The field experience. There have been many reports in the recent literature about sexual assault, sexual harassment in the field setting. Kate Clant, this is an article from Huffington Post. This has infiltrated all the way through the national park system and the national forests. And Kate Clancy is an anthropologist and has written extensively about this. She conducted a survey of over 666, I think, people who worked in the field. A majority of survey respondents, over 70%, responded they had directly observed and been told about the occurrence of sexual harassment in the field. Over 20% of respondents reported that they had personally experienced sexual assault, meaning unwanted sexual contact. This is unacceptable, and we have to do everything we can to take care of this. What's even more disturbing, for the number of people that were surveyed and that experienced this type of behavior, if you look to the far right, the number of people who reported these events and were satisfied by the outcome of reporting is almost negligible. So we need to have systems in place to deal with this up front. I'll also just touch on bullying, which is aggressive or abusive behavior. Bullies can make life difficult for the target. There's always an imbalance of power, impart psychological or physical harm. Quite often it's serial. And again, whether it's faculty on student or student on student, this also is unacceptable behavior. It can be overt or covert, but it almost always comes down to unequal power structures. And it really does need to be addressed. So I would just leave you the three statements in red. There's no such thing as a neutral bystander. Silence is complicity, and there's always collateral damage. People get hurt, not just the people involved with the incident, but people surrounding. There are really good intervention strategies. Empowering the bystander. This is from a group called Hollebeck, which is absolutely great. And I would say that in your field setting, I would have training about empowering bystanders, and we are simply not going to let these behaviors enter our field site. And so the 5 Ds from Hollebeck is direct, say or do something, distract, move attention away from the situation, delegate, get help from others, delay by offering support, and document, creating a record. So last slide, be aware, be proactive, and prevent in the first place and act if you need. And so again, my advice to you is speak up and empower bystanders. Lead by example. Leadership comes from the top, and our behaviors in the field setting set the standard for what's going to happen at camp. Look for warning signs. Be aware of microaggressions and implicit bias, and license everyone to be moral agents and empower bystanders. Make it easier to report abuse and harassment. Make sure that you have policies in place and that they work. Make safety a day-to-day priority, and take a collective stand against harassment. And make sure in your field setting that you cultivate and insist upon a programmatic climate that is inclusive, welcoming, and safe. And as always, an ounce of prevention is always the best policy. So I'd like you to, as you leave this webinar, you might reflect on where and when and how is professionalism taught in your field program? Do you do it explicitly? Do you do it by example? Or perhaps you don't do it at all. And maybe that's something to think about. Who has responsibility for this type of instruction? Do you have plans in place to deal with bad situations? And is there ultimately accountability? References to things that I've talked about are on the last slide, and we've got extensive web pages, which I'll just scroll through, that have just oodles and oodles of resources and references for you. And I'll leave you with Walt Whitman, who says, "The earth never tires. The earth is rude, silent, incomprehensible at first. Nature is rude and incomprehensible at first. Be not discouraged, keep on. There are divine things well enveloped. I swear to you, there are divine things more beautiful than words can tell." With that, get out into the field with your students. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. That was great. So at this time, we can open it up for questions for Dave. And if anyone has a question, you can use the Q&A box that's found at the bottom of your screen. You can just go in and type those.
And I'm not, can I see the QA box? Okay. I see there's a chat. Okay.
Okay. It may not show up on yours. I know I have one question about assessment. So you mentioned several of the learning and developmental gains and experiences that come from these field experiences. How would you go about assessing or looking for changes in students when it comes to these effective gains, especially something like embodiment?
Yeah, so going back to my RU experience, we had a number of formative assessments that we used. And so we tried to check with the kids day to day to make sure that they were on task, physically capable of doing what we were doing, because we were having 15 and 20 mile days in the backcountry at Yellowstone. And so a number of things, when we would go up to them in a given field site, my partner and I would always ask, "Where are you on the map? What are you doing? And sometimes, why are you doing that?" And so there's these little checks along the way to make sure that everybody stayed on task. Every night, I showed a picture of our communal dinner, and that was the best part of the day because the groups were out in different parts of the field site. And we would have a report out. They always worked in groups of 3, so each subgroup would have a report out about what they saw for the day, what they were most excited about, in some cases maybe what they're most surprised about. And then we had cross-group talk. Group A was working on one part of the project, and they said, "Oh, we saw some phenomena that Group B might need to know about." So we would do that. Every morning, we would have a safety check before we went out, a gear check and a safety check to make sure that everybody had the right gear. And every group would make a statement about what their goals were for the day, what they were going to collect, and what the purpose was. And the other thing is that we had a matrix of tasks that we had students fill out on a daily basis to make sure that in aggregate, we were moving towards the overall project goal and that everybody was contributing. So I guess I would say the most important thing for us were the daily formative interventions to make sure that students were feeling well physically, that they were engaged in the science, and that they were confident that they were making progress, and also to check for any interpersonal things. And we really did not have much in the way of interpersonal issues. So anyway, I would just say that day-to-day formative assessments, we also had interview protocols before and after the total project, and we also did confidence surveys. So we asked, because students came from all over the country, we didn't know them coming in. So we did a confidence survey to ask questions like, how confident are you in your ability to collect structural data or describe rocks or things like that? And then we gave the same survey at the end and tried to measure the gains that they made. And some of those weren't just technical. Some of those questions were also effective about motivations to continue in a career in the geosciences, and attitudes about doing research and those types of things. So those were again, Jill Singer has written about some of this, and one of the references I put on the last slide is about teaching, undergrad research as teaching practice. We have a whole web module on the instruments that we use there.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. We have a couple other questions.
Okay.
There's one that comes from Julie. She says, "Hi Dave, can you speak to inclusivity of students who may have mobility impairments? It seems to me that field experiences are often a test of athleticism rather than of knowledge and skill development. How can field faculty or leaders level this playing field?"
Yeah, absolutely. I have to tell you honestly, we advertised our Yellowstone experience as being very physical backcountry, and that's what we did. We did backcountry mapping in places that was off trail and long days. So that particular experience was exclusive for people with disabilities. I would indeed refer you to Chris Atchison's group. And the acronym escapes me, but they've been working very hard to develop field exercises and field trips for people with disabilities. I'm going to say it's, geez, I'm spacing the acronym, but I'll post it. But anyway, so increasingly at our GSA meetings, there almost always is a field trip for people with disabilities. And in designing, if you're starting from scratch and if you're designing a new activity, you might indeed want to design this so that it could indeed be accessed by all people. So rather than doing way backcountry stuff like we did, make sure you're working on road cuts or things that might involve remote sensing or other lab-based activities. Yeah, so it is an increasing concern, but yeah, the point's well taken. The point's well taken. Many field camps do look like you're going to boot camp and training for a marathon. And I think that we can do, with a little forethought, we can have the same type of experience that can be accessible to everyone.
Nice. And Julie and also Allison Jolly have both.
Yes, thank you. International. So I just say geoscience diversity. I knew that was in there. So thank you so much, Allison.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and we also have another question from Rachel here. I believe it's something similar. What accommodations or alternatives are out there that people use to facilitate field experiences for students who are not fully mobile? So not wheelchair bound, but a bad knee or
Yeah.
not sufficiently physically fit.
Yeah, and just to follow on my previous comments, I would say there's a difference between equal and equitable. And so, some field camps do require solo mapping. Every field camp I've been involved with, we work in teams just because somebody can go down. And I always work in teams of at least 3 because if somebody gets hurt, we need somebody to stay with the victim and one person to go out and get aid if they're not in radio contact. But I would say this, because you're working in small groups, the equal part would mean that everybody covers the same traverse the same way, step by step. And the equitable part would be, well, somebody could be at a control station, others could go out on reconnaissance and come back and report. We've got all kinds of digital imaging and telemetry and all of those devices, and there's absolutely no reason why images can't be sent back to people who are not quite as mobile by telemetry. I believe that Steve Whitmire's James Madison University is starting to do this at their field camp. And there are other tasks that can be done that don't require going remote, data, not just acquisition, but integration and analysis. So I think that within a group, if you can assign equitable activities so that everybody contributes in a positive way to the project, I think that will go a long ways.
Great, thank you. So we have just a couple minutes left if anyone else has another question to come in. I don't want to cut anyone off in case they're typing. And I don't see any. So I'm going to say that if there are any other questions that do come up afterwards, feel free to contact us. Again, you can find our information through the U-FERN website. You can contact Dave with any follow-up questions. And if there's something that we need to post an answer to, we'd be glad to add that to the webinar and to the resources on the website following this. We do have one more poll that I wanted to send out before everyone leaves. Sorry. And with that, so there's just one more poll, a yes or no. If you don't mind filling that out before you head out. And I appreciate everyone for being here. And again, the webinar will be posted on our website. And Dave, thank you so much. This was really, really interesting. And if you'll wait just a few minutes as everyone fills out their poll and begins to head off.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Megan.